I was 54 years old when I found a dusty auction catalogue in my aunt's attic. In the margin of page 17, next to a listing for an 1,856 British Guiana 1-cent magenta, my dead mother had written 3 lines in blue ink. That one note, dated 2 months before her death, sent me on a 2-year journey through bank records in the Cayman Islands, a Swiss philatelist's climate-controlled vault, and finally into a federal courtroom where my Aunt Patricia's face drained of colour as the judge read the verdict. And now, every woman who receives a grant from the Elena Vance Foundation sees my Uncle Richard's full name embossed at the bottom of the certificate, the unwilling donor forever. My name is Catherine, and I am a forensic document examiner. For 25 years, I have studied the microstructures of paper fibre, the chemical composition of inks, and the precise stroke sequences that distinguish a genuine signature from a carefully plotted forgery. I work at a lab with a comparison microscope that can resolve ink layers at 1200x, a video spectral comparator that maps the exact wavelengths of pigment absorption, and a humidity chamber where I age paper samples to test authenticity. I have testified as an expert witness in 47 federal cases, and I have never been successfully challenged on cross-examination because I do not guess. I measure. My mother, Elena Vance, was the quiet architect of everything I became. She spent 3 decades building a collection of rare British colonial stamps, specializing in printing errors and provisional overprints from the Mauritius Post Office and the early penny black plates. Every single stamp she acquired was catalogued in a custom leather journal, each entry written in her looping cursive with a fountain pen loaded with iron gall ink, each stamp slipped into a glassine envelope with a handwritten provenance note and a small square of archival tissue. She taught me to see details before I could tie my shoes. When she died of ovarian cancer the week I turned 12, she left the entire collection, 62 individual lots, in a trust with my Uncle Richard as trustee, to be held for me until my 50th birthday. That was the plan. The day my Uncle Richard died of a sudden stroke at age 78, I drove 5 hours from my home in Atlanta to his house in Clearwater expecting grief, but I found a nest of vultures already circling. My Aunt Patricia met me at the front door with a tight slash of a smile, and a lukewarm casserole in a disposable aluminum pan that still had a price sticker on the bottom from the Publix deli. Her son Brandon, a 42-year-old wealth manager with a spray tan, so even it looked painted, and a leased black Audi A6 he kept polishing with a microfiber cloth, was in the living room pulling open my uncle's desk drawers and muttering about where the old man kept his checkbooks. His wife Chloe, a real estate agent with a shark's smile, and a massive diamond that I knew came from a line of jewelry she'd pressured Brandon to buy after a single good quarter, was walking around the dining room with her phone out, photographing the silverware and the antique crystal decanters. They were not mourning, they were managing. I was given the guest bedroom at the end of the upstairs hall, a narrow room with a twin bed covered in a Chennel spread that smelled of mothballs and old cedar, a dresser with a missing knob, and a window that faced the neighbour's fence. Patricia told me she would handle all the funeral arrangements, and I was to just rest and not stress myself. That evening, while they huddled in the kitchen discussing probate timelines with a lawyer on speakerphone, I drifted up to the attic to find my mother's old photo albums. The attic was stifling, lit by a single bare bulb, and the air was thick with the smell of cellulose insulation and decades of trapped heat. I found a stack of my mother's albums near the back, wrapped in a plastic bag, but behind them, tucked into a gap in the fiberglass, was a shoebox. I pulled it out and lifted the lid. Inside were over a dozen stamp catalogues from the 1990s and early 2000, Stanley Gibbons, Scott, and a few specialized British Caribbean volumes, their spines cracked and pages dog-eared. I was just starting to flip through one when I heard the groan of the folding attic stairs. Brandon's head appeared, his face sheened with sweat. He looked at the box in my hands, scrunched his nose, and said, "Junk. Mom should have tossed that years ago." He took the box from me, walked it to a black contractor bag already half full of old clothes and mildewed magazines, and dropped it in with a thud. Then he dusted his hands and said, "Catherine, come on, there's nothing up here worth keeping." I murmured something about needing fresh air and went back downstairs. An hour later, when everyone was in the den watching a game, I slipped outside, retrieved the black bag from the trash cans at the curb, and carried it into the laundry room. The bag was damp from the evening humidity, and a few of the catalogue covers were already starting to warp. I pulled out the entire shoebox and hid it inside my suitcase, buried under my clothes. That night, after the house went quiet, I sat on the edge of that twin bed with a small LED flashlight and opened a 2009 Stanley Gibbons Commonwealth and British Empire stamps catalogue. The pages were brittle at the edges, and they gave off a faint vanilla scent of decomposing lignin. I flipped carefully until I reached the section on Mauritius, and there on page 17, next to the listing for the Mauritius Post Office, 2 penny blue, I saw my mother's handwriting. In blue fountain pen ink she had written, "Acquired March 14, 2002, Exdale Liechtenstein, Cert. BPA photo file 2271A, full original gum, large margins, a true gem." The ink had oxidized slightly, darkening at the edges, and under my flashlight I could see the tiny striations in the stroke where her nib had caught on a paper fiber. I knew that handwriting as well as my own. And then, beneath that entry, in a shakier hand, written in the same iron gall ink but with more tremor, my mother had added 3 sentences that made my throat close. "Do not trust Richard or Patricia. If you are reading this, they have lied. Save yourself and find the stamps." I set the catalogue down, my hands trembling. 4 years earlier, on my 50th birthday, I had called my Aunt Patricia expecting to arrange the transfer of the collection. Instead, she had called me 2 days before, her voice wavering with what I now realized was performance. She told me that a pipe had burst in their climate-controlled storage unit, and the entire stamp collection had been submerged in 2 feet of floodwater for a week before they discovered it. She sent me a blurry photo of a soggy cardboard box and a water-stained letter from their homeowner's insurance denying the claim for gradual water damage not covered under the policy. I had grieved the loss of those stamps like a second death. I trusted her. I never asked to see the storage unit, never demanded proof beyond that photo. But now, holding a catalogue my mother had hidden and dated, I understood. The flood was a lie. They had sold my mother's legacy, pocketed the cash, and fed me a story I swallowed whole. I sat there in the dark and let the anger crystallize into something cold and patient. I was going to find every stamp, every cent, and every scrap of evidence, and I was going to use my entire professional toolkit to unravel them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family loyalty should never be a weapon. Now, back to what happened next. The next morning, I was barely awake when Patricia called me to the kitchen. She had laid out a plate of croissants and a carafe of orange juice, as if staging a bed and breakfast, and next to the plate sat a stack of legal documents with coloured tabs sticking out the sides. She wore a soft lavender cardigan and spoke in a voice dripping with ersatz sympathy. "Catherine, sweetheart, I know this is a hard time, but we need to tidy up the trust. You know, just to close things out legally and give you one less thing to worry about." She slid the top document toward me. The title was Release of Trustee and Indemnity Agreement. I scanned the dense blocks of text. It absolved Richard and Patricia Vance of any and all liability regarding the disposition of the Alina Vance Trust assets, specifically the stamp collection, and it included a clause acknowledging that I had been informed of the flood loss and accepted it as final and irrevocable. It further gave Patricia a full power of attorney over any residual funds in my mother's estate, a few $1,000s in a savings account I hadn't even known existed. Patricia slid a heavy Mont Blanc Meisterstück pen across the table, the same model my mother had used, and said, "You sign this and we can all move on. In fact, you can stay here with us in the guest house until you're back on your feet. No rush." The guest house was a converted garage behind the main house, a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a single window that faced a wooden fence. I had noticed that morning that its door had a keypad lock with a fresh battery, and the only person who knew the code was Brandon. I understood immediately that it was a cage, not a kindness. But I needed time. I needed access. I needed them to drop their guard, so I played foggy and compliant. I blinked slowly, touched my temple with 2 fingers, and let my voice go soft and confused. "Aunt Paddy, I'm still so foggy from the drive and everything. My doctor said travel stress can trigger these cognitive fog episodes. Can I look at this tomorrow? My head just is not clear enough for legal language yet." I let my eyes drift out of focus, a technique I'd perfected during long depositions where I needed to appear overwhelmed. Patricia exchanged a glance with Brandon, who was leaning against the counter with a coffee mug and a smirk. He shrugged. "Sure, take a few days, it's not going anywhere." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear, you rest." That afternoon, I moved my suitcase and a few personal items into the guest house, which smelled of bleach and had a mattress still wrapped in plastic. I noted that the keypad beeped every time the door opened, and Brandon had programmed his own fingerprint for the deadbolt. I was effectively locked in at night. But I had a small notebook. a set of lockpicking tools disguised inside a hollow pen casing in my toiletry bag, and a portable flatbed scanner the size of a hardcover book that I used for field document examination. I began to plan the next phase. Over the following weeks I became a piece of furniture. I moved quietly, spoke little, and kept a small moleskine notebook in my pocket where I jotted down timestamps, overheard phrases, and license plates. I noticed that Brandon took frantic phone calls on the patio, pacing back and forth in his loafers, his voice low and tense. He used phrases like margin call on the leveraged portfolio, collateral reclassification request, and they're accelerating the note on the expansion loan. I knew enough about finance to understand that he was facing a liquidity squeeze, possibly a margin call from his firm's risk department, and he was scrambling to post additional collateral. Patricia dodged calls from a number within 345 area code, which I traced to the Cayman Islands by searching the caller ID on a reverse lookup tool. She would silence the phone, glance around, and whisper, "Not now, call back later." Chloe continued to spend as if the tap would never run dry. I saw her order a custom chaise lounge for the Florida room that cost $4,200, and she once left a Saks Fifth Avenue receipt on the kitchen counter for a handbag that cost more than my first car. Meanwhile, in the driveway, dominating the front lawn like a beached whale, sat a brand new Tiffin Phaeton luxury RV, a 40-foot diesel pusher with 3 slide-outs, a residential refrigerator, and a paint job that shimmered with a diamond shield clear coat. I walked around it one morning while everyone was sleeping, taking photos of the VIN stamped on the frame rail and the license plate. A quick online search of the VIN pulled up the vehicle's title date. It had been titled 4 years and 2 months ago, exactly 60 days after my 50th birthday. The math made my stomach clench. I documented everything and saved it to an encrypted cloud folder. The first scrap of physical evidence came while I was taking out the kitchen trash, a chore I volunteered for because it gave me unsupervised access to the entire first floor. I was cinching the white bag when a crumpled receipt caught my eye, stuck to the side of a coffee filter mess. I pulled it out carefully, flattening it on the counter. It was a consignment receipt from J.P. McAllister Philatelics, a stamp dealer in Orlando I recognized from industry journals. The date stamp was June of that same year, 4 years prior. The receipt described a British Guiana 1856 1C black on magenta, sold on consignment for $85,000 net to client per ref, 0612 Vance. The seller's signature block contained my uncle's distinctive left-slanted script with an oversized capital R and a looping flourish on the descending stroke. I knew that handwriting from dozens of birthday cards. I photographed the receipt from 3 angles with my phone, using the macro lens to capture the paper texture and the indentation from the ballpoint pen. Then I placed it back exactly as I'd found it, sticky side down, and finished tying the bag. That receipt was the first link in the chain, and it pointed to a consignment relationship that had likely liquidated the entire collection. The opening I needed to access the locked filing cabinet in the hallway came through a household accident. Chloe, attempting to change a light fixture in the main house with a YouTube tutorial and a screwdriver she was holding backwards, had tripped the circuit breaker for the hallway, and then, in her frustration, jammed the wrong key into the old metal filing cabinet that held household records. She stood there with a butter knife, almost in tears, while Brandon shouted from the kitchen that he needed the property tax statements inside, or the bank would delay the refinancing. I stepped forward and said, "I can open it." My father was a locksmith. I apprenticed with him one summer in high school. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "You, Catherine, you've been sitting behind a desk for 20 years. I smiled sweetly. Muscle memory is a funny thing. I pulled the hollow pen casing from my bag, unscrewed the tip, and removed a small tension wrench and a short hook pick made of spring steel. I knelt in front of the filing cabinet. The lock was a standard 5-pin tumbler with a chrome escutcheon plate, and from the feel of the keyway I suspected it had a light spring tension and no security pins. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied gentle clockwise pressure, just enough to bind the first pin. Then I slid the hook pick in, probing for the binding order. Pin 1 was sticky, and I lifted it until I heard a soft click and felt the slight rotation of the plug. Pin 2 was already loose. Pin 3 needed a higher lift, and I rocked the pick upward until it set with a crisp snap. Pin 4 was binding under low torsion, and I had to almost past it before it clicked into place. Pin 5 lifted easily. I increased the torsion, the plug rotated smoothly, and I slid the drawer open in under 40 seconds. Chloe stared with her mouth open. Patricia's face flickered between surprise and something colder, but she recovered quickly and said, Well, that's a useful little trick. She never suspected that I had been doing far more delicate work in my own investigations. That night I waited until the main house went dark at 11. I had noted the pattern. Brandon always turned off the kitchen light last, and the motion sensors on the patio were on a separate circuit I could see from my window. I put on dark clothing, a pair of nitrile gloves, and a headlamp with a red LED mode, and I walked barefoot across the Bermuda grass to the side door of the main house. My uncle's home office was at the end of the hall, and it had been locked ever since his death, with Patricia declaring it off-limits to protect his papers. The door had a basic Schlage single-cylinder deadbolt. I pulled out a tension wrench and a wave rake, a three-peak rake designed to zip pins in low-security residential locks. I inserted the tension wrench, applied moderate clockwise torque, and raked the pins in 3 quick strokes. The lock turned, and I eased the door open. The office smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, and a faint layer of dust had already settled on the desk. In the corner stood a 4-drawer Hahn filing cabinet with an older, simpler wafer lock. I used a jiggler key, a thin piece of metal with several common cuts along its edge, and after about a minute of subtle rocking, the lock gave way. I pulled the drawers open systematically. In the bottom drawer, in a hanging folder labeled Personal 2019, I found the mother lode, a consignment agreement between Richard Vance and J.P. McAllister Philatelics, dated 4 years and 1 month ago. It listed the entire stamp collection, 62 individual lots, with a total estimated auction value of $310,000, broken down into categories: British Guiana singles, Mauritius post office rarities, penny black plate blocks, and a selection of Cape of Good Hope triangulars. The agreement authorized a reserve price of $300,000 and a seller's commission of 15%. Stapled behind it was a bank statement from a Banco Cayman account in Patricia Vance's name, showing a wire transfer of exactly $310,000 3 days after the auction settlement date. And beneath that, the smoking gun, a photocopy of a letter addressed to J.P. McAllister, supposedly written and signed by me, dated 2 months before my 50th birthday. The letter stated that due to sudden financial hardship, I was authorizing the immediate sale of the entire collection, and I directed the proceeds to be wired to the account listed below for my Aunt Patricia to manage on my behalf. The signature was a clumsy forgery. I tilted the paper under the red light of my headlamp, and my professional eye dissected it instantly. The pen pressure was uniform, flat, with none of the dynamic variation of a living hand. I could see tremor marks at the start of several letters, a classic sign of a slow, traced forgery. The ink was a standard black ballpoint gel, while every known sample of my signature from that era, and all my personal correspondence, was written with a fountain pen using Pelikan 4001 brilliant black ink, a dye-based ink with a distinctive chromatography profile. And the alignment of the signature relative to the signature line was mechanically perfect, no natural slant. I had the whole fraud documented, from the consignment to the offshore transfer to the forged authorization. I pulled out my portable scanner, a Brother DS940 that connects to my phone and scans at 600 dpi optical resolution. I scanned every page of that folder, plus the receipt I had photographed earlier, creating high-resolution, time-stamped PDFs. While replacing the documents, my fingers brushed against a small manila envelope tucked at the back of the drawer. I opened it and found a safety deposit box key, a small brass key with no cuts on the edge but a flat electronic contact pad, stamped with the logo of First Coastal Bank and the number 42B. The key was cool against my palm. I remembered my mother had a safe deposit box at that same bank branch, but my uncle had told me years ago, almost offhandedly, that it had been emptied after her death and closed. I pocketed the key, locked the cabinet, locked the office door, wiped the handles with the gloves and slipped back to the guest house. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark, turning that key over and over, wondering what my mother might have hidden. The next morning I drove to First Coastal Bank alone, an outing I sold as a trip to pick up a prescription and some fresh air. The bank was a low brick building near the marina, and when I presented the key and my driver's license at the safe deposit desk, the manager, an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain named Mrs. Delgado, looked at the key and then at me with a strange expression. "Miss Vance, we've been wondering when you'd come. This box has a special instruction. It was flagged by the original owner, your mother, to require a dual verification, your physical presence and a biometric thumbprint scan. She set that up back in 1997, before she passed." A cold shiver ran down my arms. My mother had designed this to be opened only by me as an adult. I was led into the vault, a room panelled in steel with safety deposit boxes stacked floor to ceiling. A technician wheeled in a portable biometric scanner, a small device with a glass plate and a USB connection to a laptop. I placed my right thumb on the plate. There was a soft beep and the screen flashed green. Then Mrs. Delgado inserted the key into a digital reader and a long metal box slid out on a hydraulic arm. She placed it on the table and left me alone. I opened the lid. Inside, there was a single manila envelope and a small glass vial with a clear liquid and a label printed with a barcode and a string of alphanumeric characters. I opened the envelope and pulled out a typed letter, the paper thick and creamy with age, the font a distinctive courier from an old typewriter my mother had used. I read it slowly, my heart hammering. Catherine, if you are reading this, they've already sold the stamps. I knew Richard couldn't be trusted. He'd been eyeing my collection since the day I showed him the penny black plate 77 block, and he practically salivated. So I did something your uncle never knew about. Every stamp I ever acquired was treated with Pro Tag Secure, a transparent ultraviolet ink that contains a unique synthetic DNA sequence, registered to Alina Vance, lot by lot, with the International Philatelic Security Database. That ink is invisible to the naked eye, but any major auction house scanning with a standard UV lamp will detect it. The database flags any sale that appears after my death and automatically sends an encrypted alert to my attorney, Marcus Webb, at Webb and Associates Trust Law in St. Petersburg. He has instructions to wait for you. The vial contains a sample of the DNA marker for verification. Go to him immediately. You are not alone and I am still taking care of you. I held that vial in my shaking hand. The liquid inside was odorless and faintly viscous. My mother, with a forensic mind that rivaled my own, had built a dead man's switch right into the paper fibers of her beloved stamps. She had booby-trapped her own collection, knowing that any future sale would trigger a chain of notifications that would lie dormant until I unlocked them. I felt a sob catch in my throat, but I pushed it down. This was not the time for tears. This was an activation signal. I drove directly to the law office of Marcus Webb, a small stucco building near the water with a sea grape tree shading the entrance. Inside, a silver-haired man in his 70s with a bow tie and a calm demeanor greeted me with a folder already open. He confirmed that the International Philatelic Security Database had triggered an alert 4 years ago when a consignment of 62 stamps matching my mother's DNA tags passed through the London auction house Spink and Son. He had attempted to contact me via certified mail, but the registered address on file had been mysteriously changed to my uncle's house a month before the notice, and the letters had been intercepted. He suspected fraud but could not move forward without me. However, he had notified the FBI's art crime team, a specialized unit that investigates theft of cultural property, fraud involving collectibles, and international money laundering. Agent Sarah Okonkwo, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy blazer with a no-nonsense posture, had been building a file for 2 years. She had already traced the bank account in the Caymans and the RV purchase, but she needed evidence of the forgery and the conspiracy to defraud me specifically. She needed me to provide a sworn statement, and ideally, to capture a verbal confession or an attempted destruction of evidence on audio. We met that afternoon in a conference room at the FBI's Tampa field office. Agent Okonkwo slid a small digital audio recorder across the table, a device disguised as a silver pendant on a chain. This records continuously for 18 hours on a single charge, and the audio is uploaded to a secure cloud via a cellular chip. If you wear this, and they say something incriminating, or if they try to force you to sign something or destroy documents, we can move on the wire fraud and conspiracy charges within hours. We can also freeze the Cayman account and seize the RV as a fraudulent asset. But I need you to keep acting like you know nothing. Can you do that? I looked at that pendant and pictured Patricia stepping over my body in a crisis. Yes, I said, I can do that. I clipped the pendant onto a simple chain around my neck, and I drove back to the guest house with the wire activated. The cruelty I witnessed next erased any lingering shred of family bond. I decided to test them. For 3 days I complained of dizziness and chest pressure. I skipped meals, letting my face look drawn, and I mentioned to Chloe that my doctor had warned me about stress-induced cardiac episodes given my history. I set the stage. Then, on a Friday evening, when all 3 of them were in the living room watching a game show, and I was seated on the sofa, I staged the crisis. I straightened up suddenly, clutched my left arm with a strangled gasp, and then let my body go limp, collapsing off the sofa onto the Persian rug. I landed with a thud that I felt in my shoulder, but I lay perfectly still, my eyes closed to thin slits, my breathing shallow and ragged. The room went silent for 2 seconds. Then I heard Patricia say, "Is she fainting again?" I felt the vibration of footsteps on the floor, and then, unmistakably, I felt the sole of a shoe brush against my hair and temple as Patricia stepped over my body, not around it. She walked directly to the foyer where my purse sat on a console table. I heard the sound of the zipper opening and then the rustle of papers. From the living room, Brandon's voice carried, casual and bored, "She's just being dramatic, Mom. She'll get up." Chloe's voice quivered, "Should I call an ambulance?" Her lips looked blue. Patricia hissed from the hallway, "Not until she signs. The release is in her bag. I saw it this morning. If she's actually dying, we need it signed before she goes, or the whole thing gets tied up in probate and we lose access to the residual estate funds." I lay there on that rug, and behind my closed lids, I catalogued every word as evidence. They were going to let me die on that carpet over a few $1,000s in a savings account. I stayed limp for another 60 seconds, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it, and then I stirred weakly, moaned, and blinked open my eyes. Immediately, Patricia dropped the manila folder she had been rifling through, rushed back, and knelt beside me with a performance of frantic concern. "Oh my God, Catherine, are you all right? Brandon, get some water." I let Chloe help me to a chair, sipped the water, and said nothing. That night, after they left me alone, I whispered a detailed description of the event into the pendant recorder, capturing the timestamp and my own emotional state. That recording would later be played in court, and the jury would hear Patricia's own voice brushing past a dying woman to grab a legal document. The end came quickly after that. Agent Okonkwo's team had moved to freeze the Cayman account, and the auction proceeds still held in escrow, and they were hours away from securing arrest warrants for wire fraud, conspiracy, and grand theft. I suspect Patricia got a panicked call from her offshore banker because the next morning, before the sun was fully up, she and Brandon knocked on my door at 7 a.m. Their faces were tight with forced calm. Patricia had dressed in a navy blazer as if for a business meeting, and Brandon kept jangling his keys. "Catherine," Patricia said, "we need to go to the bank to finalize the trust paperwork. There's a safety deposit box your mother left that only you can open, and it holds the original trust deed. We need it to release the remaining funds and close the estate. It's just a formality, but it's urgent." I knew exactly which box she meant, the one my mother had rigged with a biometric dual-access protocol and a DNA alert trigger. In truth, the box now contained evidence envelopes placed by the FBI as part of a sting. The second I opened it and the authentication matched, the bank's digital system would send an automated alert to Agent Okonkwo's phone. They needed my thumbprint and my personal passcode, and they had no idea that the box was already wired for their arrest. I dressed slowly, clipped the pendant recorder under my blouse, and let them drive me to the bank in the RV, which Patricia said was more comfortable for my nerves. The irony was staggering. We pulled into the parking lot, the huge vehicle blocking 3 spaces, and we walked into the vault room. Mrs. Delgado was pale but composed, and she led us to box 42B. I could see that an additional piece of equipment was now sitting on the table, a small black antenna array that I knew was a cellular signal booster for the FBI's remote monitoring. Patricia stood to my left, her breath shallow, her fingers twitching. Brandon stayed by the door, his jaw tight. I placed my thumb on the biometric reader, then keyed in the passcode that Marcus Webb had given me, my mother's birthday and my own backwards. The drawer slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Inside lay a thick manila envelope stamped in red ink. "FBI evidence, do not disturb." Patricia snatched at it, but I held it against my chest and took a step back. "You sold my mother's legacy and bought a rolling mansion," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You forged my signature, you laundered the proceeds through an offshore account, and you stepped over my body when you thought I was dying. I am done protecting you." As I spoke, the vault door opened, and Agent Okonkwo entered with 2 uniformed FBI agents, their badges displayed and their hands on their service weapons. Patricia's face collapsed into a mask of terror and rage. She turned toward the exit, saw the agents, and let out a sound that was somewhere between a shriek and a sob. Brandon tried to bolt, shoving past a chair, but an agent blocked the door and commanded him to the ground. In under 2 minutes, both of them were in handcuffs, and Chloe, who had been waiting in the RV and never even entered the bank, was detained in the parking lot. The RV itself was towed to a federal impound lot that same afternoon, seized as a fraudulent asset purchased with stolen funds. The arrest was clean, airtight, and recorded on 4 different security cameras and my pendant recorder. The legal aftermath was a procedural masterwork. The FBI's forensic accountants traced the $310 $15,000 from the Banco Cayman account directly to the RV dealership, and they discovered that Patricia had also taken out a predatory signature loan against Brandon's inflated wealth management portfolio, using the anticipated stamp sale proceeds as a guarantee. Both loan officers testified at trial. The forged authorization letter was analyzed by my own lab, where I personally conducted the ink chromatography, the paper fiber comparison, and the stroke dynamics analysis using a video spectral comparator. I provided baseline exemplars of my signature from 10 years of personal and professional documents, and I demonstrated precisely how the forgery differed in ink type, pen pressure, and stroke sequence. I testified as an expert witness for 4 hours on direct examination, and the defense counsel's cross-examination lasted less than 20 minutes because he had no scientific counterargument. Patricia Vance and Brandon Vance were convicted on 4 felony counts each: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, theft of trust property, forgery of a financial instrument, and attempted evidence tampering. Patricia was sentenced to 56 months in a federal correctional institution. Brandon received 42 months. Chloe, who was deemed a less culpable participant but had knowingly spent the illegal funds, received 18 months of probation and a felony conviction on her record that cost her the real estate license. The house in Clearwater, the RV, Brandon's Audi, and the remaining $45,000 in the offshore account were all forfeited. I watched Patricia being led away in a prison jumpsuit, and that image, I will tell you honestly, was the single most satisfying visual I have ever processed through my retinas. The stamps themselves, however, were still scattered across the globe. The auction house Spink & Son had sold the 62 lots to various collectors in good faith, but because my mother's DNA markers and her registered provenance chain established clear title, the civil suit for conversion and replevin was straightforward. I filed in federal district court, and my argument was simple. The sale was void ab initio because the consignment was based on a forged authorization, the trust terms had never been fulfilled, and the rightful owner was me. The collector in Zurich, a retired pharmaceutical executive named Herr Dieter, had paid $115,000 for the Mauritius post office 2 penny blue. When he learned the full story through his attorney, he was horrified. He cooperated fully, agreeing to return the stamp in exchange for a full refund from the auction house's insurance carrier. The court issued a global order for replevin, and within 18 months, every single one of the 62 stamps was returned to my possession, shipped in armored FedEx packages with temperature and humidity data loggers. The final package arrived on a Tuesday. I sat in my home office and opened the boxes one by one, pulling out the glassine envelopes. Each one still bore my mother's handwriting, the faint smell of old paper, and the invisible glow of synthetic DNA that only a UV lamp could reveal. I then set out to turn the theft into something permanent and generative. I partnered with a philatelic auction firm that specialized in high-value rarities, a London-based house with a global clientele, and we devised a marketing campaign that emphasized the collection's unique dual provenance, the historical rarity of the stamps themselves, and the modern forensic narrative of betrayal, DNA security, and legal vindication. We sent press releases to every major philatelic journal and a few mainstream outlets, and the story of the DNA-tagged revenge collection caught fire. The auction itself was a live-streamed event. Bidding was ferocious. The British Guiana 1C magenta, which had been sold in the forced consignment for $85,000, went for $136,000 after 10 minutes of bidding between 2 anonymous phone buyers. The Mauritius 2 penny blue fetched $161,000. A block of 4 penny black plate 77 stamps, a printing anomaly so rare that my mother had once called it her crown jewel, sold for $94,000, nearly double the going rate for an unprovenanced block. Over 2 years, I liquidated every last stamp, netting a total of $437,200 after commissions, insurance, and capital gains taxes, roughly 40% above the original forced sale value. The premium came from the story, yes, but also from the undeniable authenticity that the DNA markers provided, an authentication that no forger could ever fake. With that money, I established the Elena Vance Foundation for Women's Entrepreneurship, a grant program administered through a community development financial institution. We award seed grants of $15,000 each to women in under-resourced communities who are launching small businesses, bakeries, home daycare centers, mobile bookshops, landscaping cooperatives. the kinds of enterprises that build generational wealth quietly. But I added one personal flourish that no lawyer could ever erase from the public record. Every single award certificate is printed on heavy cream stock with a gold foil seal, and at the very bottom the line reads, "This grant is made possible by the unwilling donation of Richard Vance." The name is embossed in raised black letters, so it will never fade, never be covered, never be ignored. Every press release, every annual report filed with the IRS, every framed certificate on a recipient's wall carries his full name as the involuntary benefactor. At the first award ceremony, I stood at a lectern in a small community center in Tampa, holding back tears, and I looked out at 7 women whose dreams were about to be funded. I said, "My mother believed in the power of lasting marks. The marks she left on those stamps could not be washed away by lies or flood. The marks we leave today will fund dreams for decades. And the mark on this certificate ensures that a man who tried to steal from her daughter will be remembered forever, not as he wished, but as he deserves." There is now a Richard Vance grant that funds a bakery in an immigrant neighborhood, a Richard Vance grant that bought a refrigerated truck for a woman who sells produce at farmers' markets, a Richard Vance grant that paid for a small batch soap maker's first commercial lease. His name, etched into every one of those endeavors, is a weight he will carry into his grave. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If this story resonated with you, hit like and subscribe for more tales of quiet justice and intricately planned revenge where the details make the difference. I'll be here next week with another one. Thanks for watching.